The British East India Company. How did a corporation take over an entire subcontinent? Here's the start of a takeover. On December 31st, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted 200 English merchants to have the right to trade in the East Indies. From the 200 merchants, one of the groups titled themselves as Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading in the East Indies. They later changed it to simply be the East India Company. The Britannica Group stated the English company was formed for the exploitation of trade with East and Southeast Asia and India. It was started as a monopolistic trading body so that England could participate in the East Indian spice trade. The East India Company was highly involved with spice trading. They traded such spices such as cinnamon, cardamom, turmeric, ginger, and cassia. These were all important to that time. The East India Company's first expedition was in 1601. They left with 4 ships, and it lasted 2 years. The company returned to England with about 500 tons of worth of pepper. While trading, the company realized that the Dutch East India Company had more power than them with trading spices. They decided to not just trade spices, but to go into the cotton and silk industry of trading. Historic UK talked about how their strategy of reaching out of the spice industry paid off. They stated, by the 1700s, the company had grown so large that it had come to dominate the global textile trade, not even amassed its own army to protect its interests. Most of the forces were based at 3 main stations in India, Madras, Bombay, and Bengal. On June 23, 1757, many years after they started, there was a battle called the Battle of Plassey. This battle involved the East India Company and their armies, the Bengal and French East India Company and their armies. Later in the battle, after nobody's outcome was looking great, it started to rain. Britannica Group stated that the British brought tarpaulins to keep their powder dry, but the Bengalis had no such protection. Thinking that the British guns were rendered as ineffective as their own by damp powder, the Nawab ordered his cavalry. British guns opened fire and slaughtered many of their cavalry, killing their commander. The battle ended with the East India Company having their victory. The Bengal and French casualties amount was 1,500 of 50,000 soldiers, and the British lost 100 of 3,000. History Extra stated, after military victories at battles, the East India Company was granted the Diwani of Bengal, which controls over the administration of the region and the right to collect tax revenue of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. The battle victory granted the East India Company to have more power. History Extra stated, military advantages made the East Company a powerful player in local conflicts and disputes. William Cowper was a poet, and he said this about the East India Company. They build factories with blood, conducting trade at the sword's point and dyeing the white robe of innocent commercial justice red. The company was involved in, they were also involved in opium. This was a trade that was illegal, and they smuggled opium from India into China. China wanted silver in return for tea. The British Library stated there was a fear in the country. They were looking for something that the Chinese would accept instead of silver to pay the goods they bought at Canton. Opium was a valued medicine which could deaden pain and assist sleep and reduce stress, but it was seriously addictive and millions of Chinese became dependent on the drug. Over time, the East India Company's monopoly was under attack. Its commercial operations were scaled down by the Parliament. The company was dissolved June 1st of 1874. Overall, the company took over an entire subcontinent. By having great strategies, they were able to beat their way up to the top, to the point of controlling and having political power over the people in India. It's alarming to think that this would even occur. I doubt anybody thought this would happen when the Queen first let them trade. The East India Company was a grand corporation at that time, but it's good that it's all over now. Here are my works cited.